Imagine a glowing orb, silent and alive, weaving through the shattered ruins of a forgotten radar station. It moves like it thinks, hovers like it listens, and pulses with a light that has never been understood by science. On a storm-torn hilltop steeped in wartime echoes, it returns again and again, outlasting time, surviving memory, defying explanation. Imagine what it means when nature bends into something deliberate, something watching, something waiting. Don't forget to like and share this story with your friends or closest family members to help spread awareness and caution through storytelling. May you receive great rewards for subscribe, like, comment, and share this story. Now, let's continue with the story. The year was 1983, and the skies above Folkestone, Kent, had grown unusually dark. A brutal Atlantic storm swept in fast and low, consuming the cliffs and fields in blackened cloud. Thunder rolled like distant artillery across Cheriton Hill, echoing against the cold concrete structures that still stood from the war. These were relics from another time, the acoustic mirrors and radar outposts, silent sentinels of forgotten vigilance. A group of schoolchildren from St. Elfric's Comprehensive had climbed the hill for a field study in geology. Among them was 12-year-old Hannah Myles, already bright beyond her years and fascinated by the bones of the earth. Their teacher, Mr. Kelman, spoke about chalk beds and the secrets of fossil compression, but no one was really listening anymore. All attention had turned toward the sky. Lightning danced overhead, unervingly close. Then the rain came. Sheets of it. The group began retreating toward the buses, but something made Hannah stop. There, just above the old radar control room, something moved. It was not lightning, not fire, not metal. It was a ball of light. Roughly the size of a soccer ball, the orb hovered midair, glowing amber gold, swirling with a cloudy inner core. It made no sound, yet it shimmered with heat. A soft hum seemed to press against the ears, as if the air itself were vibrating. The children gasped. One boy, Thomas, raised his camera to snap a photo. The flash went off, and instantly, the camera sparked and exploded in his hands. He screamed, not from pain, but from the shock of it. Everyone ran. Everyone except Hannah. She stood frozen. The ball seemed to notice. It drifted toward her, slow, deliberate. And then, in a blur of motion, it zipped sideways, cutting across the field like a line of thought, vanishing into the entrance of the radar bunker. No noise. No wind. Just silence. When the teachers managed to regroup the class, they found Hannah speechless and Thomas bleeding slightly from his hand. There was no sign of the orb. No trace it had ever been there. Back at school, they were instructed not to speak about the incident. Mr. Kelman claimed it was electrical interference. The headmaster quietly confiscated the ruined camera. A week later, a maintenance crew was seen around the old radar ruins, fencing off the bunker. No explanation was offered. The Folkestone Herald ran a short piece titled "Mysterious Orb Startles Students," buried on page 6 beneath a headline about local beach erosion. But those who had been there never forgot. Especially not Hannah. Years passed, but the image of the floating flames stayed with her, not just in memory, but in her dreams. It would hover in corners of her mind, pulsing like it had a rhythm. It felt less like a thing, and more like a message she hadn't yet learned how to read. That was only the beginning. Rain was falling in London when Hannah Myles opened the envelope. It bore no return address, only her name typed in clean black ink. Inside was a folded page, slightly yellowed, with one line scrawled across the center. It came back in 1994. "We need to talk. C.S." She read it 3 times. Her pulse didn't spike, but her breath did. That name, C.S., was likely Colin Shearer, one of the geology students on the trip to Cheriton Hill in 1983. She hadn't seen him in decades. The last time, he was laughing off the story of the orb with a joke. But that laughter had sounded thin, even back then. The letter had no contact information. But there was a smudge on the bottom corner, a dark streak, like graphite mixed with ash. 2 weeks later, Hannah stood once more on the slopes of Cheriton Hill. She was no longer a girl in boots with a school satchel. She was now Dr. Hannah Myles, researcher in atmospheric anomalies and electromagnetic fields. Her studies had taken her around the world, but this place, the forgotten hill near the English coast, had never left her. It was early October. The fog rolled in low and heavy. The hilltop was quiet, the silence broken only by distant traffic and the whistle of wind slipping through the abandoned sound mirrors. These vast, curved walls of concrete once caught echoes of approaching enemy planes. Now they caught only memories. She knelt by the entrance of the old radar control bunker. The concrete had cracked with time, moss creeping into the seams. But it was still sealed, metal plate welded across the entrance, fresh compared to the rest. She set up her gear. Microwave detectors, EM field monitors, an air ion counter, a handmade spectrometer calibrated for silicon vapor traces, and a handheld recorder, already ticking. She spoke softly into it. "This is Dr. Hannah Myles, recording at the Cheriton Hill radar installation. Atmospheric pressure is dropping. Local forecast predicts lightning after sundown. I'm here to observe any anomalous luminescent activity that may manifest in this area." She didn't mention why she believed something would appear tonight. She didn't need to. The pressure in her chest told her enough. The storm rolled in quickly. Wind lifted her hair, then dropped it again. Static charged the air. Her EM meter ticked upward. Then it spiked. At 9:42 p.m., she saw it. A soft golden flicker hovered near the radar bunker. She turned, heart hammering. It was the orb. Same size. Same glow. But something was different. Its surface shimmered more clearly now, like heat through water, and its color shifted, amber to violet, then white. It made no sound, but her microphone meter was peaking. She stepped closer. Slowly. The orb pulsed once, and her monitor exploded in her hand. She stumbled back, landing hard on the wet grass. Sparks flew from her portable station. The EM meter cracked. All electronics, dead. But the orb remained. And then it moved, not randomly, not drifting, but directed. It circled once, passed over her shoulder, and approached the sound mirror. As it touched the concrete surface, the orb's glow flattened, spread, and vanished, absorbed as though swallowed by stone. Silence returned. She sat in the wet field for over an hour, shaken, fingers trembling. The only device still working was her handheld recorder. When she played it back later, in her lab, all the microphones had captured was a faint hum. Except during the exact moment the orb passed behind her. There was a tone. Low. Resonant. Layered with faint harmonics, like chords played on a buried organ. It lasted 4 seconds. And then, almost beneath the hum, one syllable. A breath. A whisper. Something that sounded like her name. 3 days after the encounter, Hannah received another letter. This one wasn't typed. The handwriting was rough, but familiar. Tight letters, slightly slanted, written in black ink on torn notepad paper. "Meet me where the stone listens. South face. Midnight. No phones." It was signed, simply, CS. Hannah didn't hesitate. She packed lightly, no electronic gear this time, only a notepad, a wind-up torch, and a compass. She left her devices behind, understanding now that whatever force she was dealing with had no tolerance for digital eyes. The moon was nearly full that night, casting pale light across the field of Cheriton Hill. The wind moved through the grass like breath through lungs. She climbed the slope in silence, feeling the weight of something larger pressing in from all sides. The south face of the acoustic mirror was cracked and weathered. Once, it had caught the distant sounds of German bombers over the channel. Now, it caught silence, or something beneath it. She waited under its curve. Exactly at midnight, a figure emerged from the tree-line. Slender, bearded, wrapped in an old waxed coat, the man moved like someone who had spent decades avoiding attention. When he got close enough, she recognized him. Colin Shearer. Older. Leaner. Eyes sunken, but clear. "You came," he said. "You saw it again," she replied. He nodded once, without emotion. 1994. Same storm. Same light. Only, I was closer. He sat beside her, pulling a folded page from his coat. It was a hand-drawn map. The hill, the mirror, the radar bunker. Marked in red were 3 small circles. It appears in patterns. Always storms. Always silence first. But it's not random. There's geometry to it. Hannah studied the map. The 3 circles formed a triangle. At the center was the radar bunker. "I think it's a field," he continued. "A self-contained electromagnetic cavity, like a standing wave trapped between anomalies in the rock. Or maybe something older. Maybe the hill isn't just chalk. Maybe it's remembering." "Remembering what?" she asked. He looked at her, and for the first time, fear broke through his calm exterior. "Us." Colin led her down the slope to a part of the hill she had never explored. Half buried in the grass was a rusted metal hatch, fused shut. He told her it was once part of a wartime listening post, sealed since the 1950s. "It opened the night I saw the orb. Only for a few minutes. Inside." He trailed off. "Inside what?" she pressed. "I saw light, floating like fog, but it had form. Shapes, symmetry like geometry made of plasma. Then I heard a tone. It matched the recordings. I woke up hours later. It was closed, and I was bleeding from my ears." She stared at the hatch, her pulse heavy. "I think it speaks in frequencies," Colin said. "Not language, but intention. And we built all of this," he gestured toward the mirrors, the bunkers, "on top of something that's been here far longer than we understand." Back at her flat, Hannah digitized Colin's hand-drawn map. When overlaid with a geological survey of the hill, she discovered something stunning. The 3 red circles corresponded with deep fault lines rich in silicate minerals, perfect conditions for generating airborne plasma under high electrical stress. It aligned with the vaporized silicon theory. It aligned with the microwave cavity hypothesis. But it didn't explain the whisper of her name, or why Colin's watch, a simple wind-up analog, stopped ticking the moment they approached the mirror. Something was returning, and it was drawing closer. The wind was strange that night, too warm for October, and moving in unnatural directions. Hannah stood once more at the edge of the acoustic mirror, Colin beside her, both wrapped in thick coats, both silent as the wind curled around them like breath from a sleeping giant. They had come to test a theory, not with digital devices, but with resonance. Colin had brought an antique signal generator, salvaged from a decommissioned Cold War listening station. No batteries, no circuits. Pure analog voltage and vacuum tubes. It hummed softly, pulsing out frequencies calibrated to match the 432 Hz tone recorded in Hannah's handheld days before. The same tone she had heard under the orb, in the moment her name was whispered. They placed it at the base of the concrete mirror, dialed it up, and waited. At first, nothing happened. Then came the shift. The fog rolled in unnaturally fast, swallowing the hill in less than a minute. The temperature dropped by 10 degrees. Hannah's breath came in visible clouds, even though the air was still. Colin's compass began spinning. He muttered something under his breath. The mirror began to vibrate. Subtly at first, just a whispering tremor through the concrete, but then stronger. Dust rose from cracks in the surface. Colin quickly shut off the generator, but the vibrations continued. Something had been set in motion. From within the fog, a light emerged. It wasn't an orb this time. It was 3. They hovered at even intervals, forming a perfect triangle in midair, bright, white-violet, rotating in slow synchronized motion. The grass beneath them flattened, rippling outward in circular waves. Hannah's heart pounded in her ears. Her body wanted to run, but her mind refused. This was why she came. This was the mystery. The phenomenon that no journal could explain, that no peer-reviewed paper could capture. One of the orbs drifted closer. Its surface wasn't uniform. It shimmered like a fluid, layered with faint hexagonal lattices that changed with every flicker. And within the light, for a fleeting instant, Hannah saw something impossible. A figure. Not solid. Not human. A suggestion of shape, an echo of motion, within the core of the orb. It looked toward her, not with eyes, but with focus. It acknowledged her. The moment broke when a surge of pressure slammed the air. The sound was deafening yet silent, like being submerged in thunder. The orbs flared once and darted away at speeds no drone or aircraft could match, disappearing behind the ridge. Then, total stillness. No wind, no fog, just moonlight and breathless quiet. The next morning, Hannah and Colin returned to the site. The ground where the orbs had hovered was scorched in 3 precise circles, each fused with glass-like fragments of silicon and chalk. The readings from their analog frequency test, handwritten in Colin's journal, revealed a bizarre resonance pattern in the soil, a harmonic series that shouldn't exist in sedimentary layers. They contacted a geophysicist at King's College anonymously. The data was forwarded. The response came back terse. Your measurements imply a contained standing wave field, possibly artificial in origin. Location classified. Colin burned the reply. Later that night, as she reviewed her notes, Hannah received a call from a blocked number. A male voice, British, clipped, spoke only once. We recommend you stop transmitting unauthorized signals in restricted geological zones. This is your only warning. Then the line went dead. Hannah sat frozen, pen falling from her hand. They were listening. And someone, maybe something, didn't want this phenomenon understood. 3 days passed in a haze. Hannah didn't sleep well. She kept waking up in the hours before dawn, drenched in sweat, hearing that tone in her head, a soft hum layered with something not quite musical, almost language, but submerged in frequencies beyond hearing. Colin had gone silent. His phone was off. His cottage outside Hythe stood empty when she drove by, his car still parked in the driveway. She knocked. No answer. She broke a window, climbed in. Nothing inside suggested violence. No blood, no signs of struggle. But his journal was missing. So was the signal generator. And on the living room wall, written in red chalk across the faded wallpaper, were 3 numbers. 7.03, 8.66, 13.73. She recognized them instantly. They were frequencies. Specific harmonic tones. Colin had written them down days before, claiming they were resonant nodes in the soil beneath the hill. What had he discovered? Hannah returned to her lab and cross-referenced the values. They weren't random. When run through a simulation of the Cheriton chalk strata, the frequencies aligned with pressure zones in the Earth where silica density was at its highest. She mapped them over the hill. The 3 points formed an equilateral triangle around the radar station, precisely where the orbs had appeared. And at the center was a shallow dip in the terrain. A concave depression, long thought to be a wartime blast crater. But what if it wasn't? What if the crater wasn't the result of impact, but output? The next morning, Hannah drove back to Cheriton Hill, alone. She brought only analog equipment. A reel-to-reel magnetic tape recorder. A custom-built frequency oscillator. A geophone. And a string of aluminum markers to help map reflections in the terrain. As she set up beneath the clouds, the sky rumbled in distant protest. Another storm was forming. At 11:17 a.m., she began her experiment. The oscillator pulsed with a controlled sweep of the recorded frequencies. 7.03 Hz, 8.66 Hz, 13.73 Hz, each transmitted through the ground in waves. She placed her hand on the soil and felt it respond. A deep tremor, like a breath caught in stone. A resonance, not seismic, but harmonic, something old and waiting. The geophone ticked, and then her recorder spun without her touching it. As the sky darkened, fog spilled once more across the valley. But this fog was heavier, thicker than before. It pooled like smoke, not mist. Her instruments failed. Needles froze. The oscillator died with a sharp pop. And through the wall of fog, she saw the mirror glow. The acoustic mirror, made of stone, designed to hear the distant roar of bombers, was no longer silent. Its surface vibrated like a speaker membrane. The fog around it pulsed with waves of invisible energy. Suddenly, Hannah felt it. Not sound, not vibration, but memory. Images exploded in her head. Not her own. Wartime flashbacks. Maps. Blueprints. Men in lab coats standing around glowing tables. Experiments underground. Sealed bunkers. Warnings. Data too strange to publish. They had tried to speak to it. They had tried to trap it. But it didn't want to be trapped. It wanted to be remembered. When she opened her eyes, she was lying face down in the grass. The fog had cleared. Her gear was scattered. Her watch was frozen at 3:16 p.m. But beside her, carved carefully into the soil by an unknown hand, or force, was a perfect circle. Inside it, a series of numbers, etched with surgical precision into the earth. 37.8922N, 23.7450E. Coordinates. Not in England. In Greece. The island of Salamis. Hannah stared at them, mouth dry. The orb had just given her a location. The phenomenon had just evolved. It took Hannah less than 2 hours to confirm the coordinates. They pointed to a remote slope on the island of Salamis, west of Athens, not far from the ancient battlefield that bore its name. But there was no archaeological site at the location. No structures. No records. Just rocky outcrop and dry, scrub-covered hills. The connection wasn't obvious. But something gnawed at the edges of her memory. She dug into war-era archives and declassified NATO reports. That's when she found it. A 1952 British naval intelligence document, partially redacted, described an unsanctioned atmospheric anomaly detection outpost on the island. The codename, Mirror Echo. It had been quietly shut down in 1956 after multiple personnel reported hallucinations, hearing disembodied voices, and experiencing short-term memory collapse. One officer described a hovering flame that left no shadow. The report ended with 2 words, stamped in red. Site compromised. Hannah booked a flight. She arrived on Salamis under a white-hot sun and a sky that felt too clean, too blue. A hired jeep took her across dry roads toward the forgotten coordinates, following GPS as best she could. There were no trails, no markers, just dust and wind. By the time she reached the site, the sun was low and the sea shimmered in silence behind her. The area was barren. No ruins. No foundation. Just a depression in the slope, shallow, but unmistakably artificial. A sunken circle, roughly 20 meters across, ringed by stones that seemed arranged. She stepped into the center. Silence. Then her compass began spinning. The wind died, and the air bent. Not literally, but the sense of it. Pressure shifted. Ears popped. She reached for her analog tape recorder and hit record. That's when she saw the first flicker. A pulse of light, faint as a spark, just beyond the perimeter. It danced once, then vanished. Then came another, opposite side. Then 2 more, in sequence. Then silence again. Then the tone. Low. Ancient. A vibration that didn't pass through the air but through bone. It was the same resonance from Cheriton Hill, the same whisper layered into fog, now reborn in heat and stone. She raised the recorder, and the ground beneath her cracked. Not violently, but with purpose. The circle split in 4 directions, revealing narrow seams of smooth stone beneath dry soil. Etched across them were shallow grooves, spirals, waves, symbols she didn't recognize but felt she somehow understood. Then the voice. Faint. Monotone. It bypassed her ears and arrived directly in her mind. You remember. Therefore, you are chosen. The light returned, this time full. The orb. Larger than before. Brighter. It hovered silently just above the soil, casting shadows that bent against the sun's natural angle. The spiral symbols below it began to glow faintly. Hannah felt warmth in her skull. Not pain, but pressure. It was showing her something again. But this time, she remained standing. Images flooded her consciousness. Maps, dozens of them, marked with the same triangle geometry from Cheriton. Each location a place with history, silence, and unexplained incidents. Mountain ridges in Kazakhstan. Submerged craters off the coast of Chile. A frozen ridge in northern Canada. They weren't random. They were nodes. And Cheriton Hill was only one of them. As the orb flickered out, the wind returned. The earth sealed itself, as if nothing had happened. But Hannah's recorder, miraculously unharmed, ticked on. She listened to the playback that night in a local guest house. There was no voice, no humming, no data spike. Only one clean, intelligible whisper at the end. Find the next. She stared at the map she'd sketched. The next node was in Romania. She didn't know why, but she knew she had to go. The flight into Romania felt surreal. Less like travel, more like compulsion. Hannah barely remembered booking the ticket or packing her gear. The coordinates she decoded from the Salami's vision had led her to a remote region of the Busiji Mountains, deep within Prahova County, where myth, geology, and military secrecy overlapped like the layers of stone beneath the earth. The terrain was brutal. Jagged ridges, thick pine forests, and ancient pathways twisted through the slopes like forgotten veins. Hannah hired a local guide, Mircea, who didn't ask questions but seemed uneasy the moment she showed him the location. "You're going near the old spine," he muttered. "They say the trees won't grow right there. Cattle avoid it. Phones stop working." She didn't tell him that was exactly what she was looking for. It took them nearly 6 hours of hiking to reach the elevation marked on her map. Dusk was descending by the time they arrived, a wind-swept clearing surrounded by dead pine stumps and lichen-covered stone. In the center of the clearing stood a large, partially buried boulder, flat-topped and unnatural in shape. Carved faintly across its face was a shallow spiral, nearly eroded by time. Hannah stepped forward, brushing her fingers across the stone. The moment her skin touched it, the air changed. The world fell quiet. Even Mircea, who stood several meters away, looked suddenly disoriented, as though gravity had slipped sideways. Then came the vibration. A low tremble beneath their feet, steady as breath. The trees creaked, not from wind, but from resonance. Hannah's ears filled with static. Her analog recorder, which she had worn slung against her shoulder, spooled into motion on its own. And the orb arrived. This one was different. Not a single light, but a swarm, countless motes of white and blue fire, swirling like fireflies pulled into a magnetic field. They gathered above the stone, spiraling faster and faster until they coalesced into a singular, pulsing sphere. Mircea fell to his knees, muttering something in Romanian. Hannah stepped closer. The orb pulsed, once, twice, and then changed. It unfolded, not physically, but spatially. It split open without breaking, becoming a flat plane of light suspended midair. Like a doorway made of plasma and memory. Within it, flickered images she couldn't grasp fully, just fragments. A cave buried in ice. A monolith glowing beneath the desert. A chamber of mirrors submerged beneath a volcano. It wasn't just showing her the nodes now. It was revealing the structure. A global lattice. Not built, but awakened. Something ancient was connecting again. Suddenly, the light snapped shut. The orb vanished. And from beneath the stone came a sound. Mechanical. Grinding. Hannah leapt back as the earth cracked in a perfect circle. A hatch, old, rusted, and lined with quartz veins, rose slowly from beneath the soil. No mechanism was visible. It rose by itself, as if obeying some unspoken command. Mircea gasped. Hannah knelt, brushing dirt away from its center. Engraved there, faint but unmistakable, were words in archaic Latin. Memonis est vivere. To remember is to live. She descended alone. The narrow stairwell dropped 20 meters below the surface, where torch-like sconces glowed with soft phosphorescence, though no flame burned. The air was dry, still. Not a speck of dust disturbed the stone. At the bottom, she entered a circular chamber, no wider than a bedroom. The walls were smooth, seamless, and covered in geometric etchings, spirals, hexagons, overlapping lattices. In the center stood a pedestal. On it, a book made of thin, metallic sheets, its pages etched with shifting symbols that changed each time her eyes focused. No language she recognized, but somehow she understood. It was a log, a record, of everything the orbs had ever seen. They weren't just phenomena, they were observers, and someone, or something, was guiding them. As she touched the final page, the chamber lit up. Her mind flooded again, but this time it wasn't images. It was coordinates. Dozens. Hundreds. Each one blinking like a star across the globe. She collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, the symbols burning in her vision. The orb wanted her to remember. But remembering came with a price. And she had just opened a door that would never close again. Hannah woke to find herself back at the forest edge, her backpack beside her, the hatch behind her sealed without a trace. The clearing was quiet again. No motes of light, no vibration, no spirals. Mircea was gone. She checked her recorder. The reels had run their full length. No sound. No static. Just a flat hum, steady, tonal, like a held breath stretched across 60 minutes. Her body ached in strange places. Muscles that shouldn't be sore were tight. Her pulse had slowed. Her thoughts were oddly clear. Too clear. Numbers rearranged themselves in her head like they wanted to be solved. Words became equations. Sounds became patterns. Her mind had changed. But that clarity came with dread. Something had been implanted into her memory. She felt it, curled like a knot behind her eyes. Back in Bucharest, she checked into a quiet hotel under a different name. She had stopped trusting phones, emails, anything digital. A day later, a knock came at her door. She didn't answer. But under the door, a single envelope slid in, with no postage or marking. Inside was a blank business card, invisible at first, until she held it under the lamp. A message burned faintly into the card. "You have entered Echo Protocol. We've been expecting you." On the back, a handwritten time and place. 12 o'clock, Friday. Piața Universității. Bench near the statue. She went. The man was already seated when she arrived. Slim, pale, early 50s perhaps, dressed like a history professor. He had no visible ID, no accent. But his words were precise, carefully chosen. "We call ourselves the custodians," he said without looking at her. "We manage what we cannot explain. We preserve what should not be forgotten." "Who are you really?" she asked. He turned. "Did the orb show you the lattice?" She didn't answer. He smiled. "It always begins there. You see the map, then the urge to follow it. Then the first sight opens itself. And from that moment, you carry it." He tapped his temple. "They chose you. You saw the book." Her breath caught. "How do you know that?" "Because I did too. In Peru. In 1991. He extended a small leather folder. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Images of the orb, of scorched stone, of other people standing in front of glowing spirals across different continents, all marked with observer node coordinates. Hannah looked up. "How many of us?" "Not many," he replied. "But enough." He leaned forward. "There's a reason these things appear in abandoned places. Ruins, bunkers, fault lines. They aren't causing memory, they're preserving it. Wherever we forget, they appear. They don't want attention. They want continuity. We suspect they've been doing this since long before we had words." "Who built them?" she whispered. His eyes grew distant. "No one knows. Maybe no one did. Maybe they're a defense mechanism of the Earth itself." He handed her a final envelope. "You're being watched now. But not just by us. You've activated multiple sites. They've noticed. They will try to discredit you. Or take what you carry." "What do I carry?" she asked, fingers tightening. He stood, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. "You carry the memory. That's more dangerous than truth. Inside the envelope were 3 new coordinates. One in the Nevada desert, one off the coast of Japan, and one in the center of the Sahara. Beneath them, a final warning written in ink. The lattice is awakening. The signals will increase. But if too many nodes activate at once, the memory may collapse into reality. And then, we're no longer just witnesses. Hannah sat in silence long after he was gone. She realized then, she wasn't chasing the orb anymore. It was guiding her. And somewhere, buried in the earth, beneath light, beneath time, something was remembering through her. The wind in the Sahara was unlike anything Hannah had ever known. Dry, blistering, and filled with a sound that wasn't wind at all, but a low, continuous hiss like whispering static. The coordinates had led her to an unmarked expanse between Algeria and Libya, far from trade routes, far from satellite paths. Even the maps showed only dunes and silence. She had hired a Tuareg guide, Isam, who said little but watched everything. When she showed him the printed coordinates, he blinked once, then muttered, "As sought Al-Kabir, the great sound." Legend spoke of it, a place where the sand sang, where camels refused to tread, and where entire caravans had vanished under moonless skies. He insisted they travel by night. By the 3rd evening, they reached the site. There was no ruin, no cave, no structure. Only an endless ripple of dunes beneath a full desert moon. And yet, the compass in her analog wristwatch spun uselessly. Isam remained behind, performing quiet prayers as Hannah climbed the dune alone. At the summit, she saw it. Beneath the pale moonlight, nestled in the center of the sand hollow, was a perfect circle of scorched earth, glass-like, blackened, and surrounded by fragments of what looked like ancient stone tiles. She descended slowly, careful not to disturb the perimeter. Then came the first vibration. Soft, subsonic, not felt in her ears but in her bones. It was the exact frequency from Cheriton, 13.73 Hz. Her body reacted before her mind did. The sand inside the circle began to shift. It flowed, not blown by wind, but pulled inward, spiraling toward a central point where a shape began to form. At first, it looked like a mound, then a rising stem of light, and finally, inevitably, the orb. But this one wasn't white. It was black. Glossy, liquid-like, absorbing the moonlight rather than reflecting it. The surface shimmered with shifting gray geometries, hexagons dissolving into spirals, spirals collapsing into eyes. And inside it, Hannah saw herself. Not mirrored, but observed. Watched. The black orb pulsed once, and she felt her vision shatter. She stood not in the Sahara, but beneath it. A chamber stretched infinitely in all directions. Walls of basalt glistened with moisture, and along their surfaces floated thousands of other orbs, silent, blinking like neurons in some buried mind. They hovered between smooth pillars inscribed with markings from every known human language, and some not known at all. In the center stood an altar, not for worship, but for connection. A thin beam of light pulsed from it, scanning her body, entering her mind. And then the voice returned. Not spoken, not heard, imposed. You have unlocked too many gates. You must now remember for them. The floor vanished, and she fell. When Hannah awoke, the sky had shifted. It was midday. The orb was gone. The circle had vanished. Her gear lay untouched beside her. But in her pocket was something that hadn't been there before. A small, metallic disc, smooth on one side, etched on the other with a lattice of lines intersecting over a globe. One location pulsed gently, an island in the Pacific. Yanaguni, the underwater monument. Long dismissed as natural formation, rumored to be ancient architecture. But now, Hannah understood. It was not built by man. It was a memory encoded in stone, a node reawakened by resonance. She turned to Isam, who watched her quietly from his perch. "It showed you, didn't it?" he asked softly. She nodded. He gave a slight smile. "You are not the first." That night, as they camped under the stars, her recorder played on its own. It emitted only one sound. A new frequency, deeper than all the rest. Measured later, it read 3.11 Hz, the resonant frequency of deep Earth crustal shifts. A warning, or a countdown. The orbs weren't just remembering. They were preparing. The water around Yonaguni was unnaturally still. Hannah stood at the edge of the dive boat, her wetsuit sealed tight, eyes locked on the waves. Beneath them, 25 meters down, lay the infamous Yonaguni Monument, an underwater mystery off the southern coast of Japan. To some, it was merely a geological accident. To others, proof of an ancient civilization swallowed by time. But to Hannah, it was something else. It was a node. The disk from the Sahara pulsed faintly in her dive bag. When held near water, it emitted low-frequency vibrations. She didn't need sonar to find her destination. The orb had encoded the location directly into her nervous system. She felt the structure beneath her. It called to her like gravity, pulling memory downward. She dove. The descent into the Pacific was surreal. Sunlight cut through the blue in flickering spears, illuminating terraces of stone carved in precise, geometric patterns. The monument didn't look natural from this angle. It looked engineered. Massive steps, sheer walls, sharp corners far too precise for erosion. As she swam closer, her flashlight caught movement. Not marine life. Not shadows. Symbols, etched along the stone walls. Familiar spirals. Lattices. Repeating frequencies. The same markings from Cheriton, Busigi, and the Saharan chamber, now worn by water and time, but intact. She placed the metal disc into a groove that matched its shape. It clicked softly. Then everything changed. The stone pulsed with light. It wasn't dramatic. Just a soft glow, like moonlight from within the rock itself. A current formed, gentle, circular, spinning sand up from the seafloor and revealing a deeper entrance. A corridor. Hannah swam in, guided by the light. She descended through a submerged passage, the temperature dropping with every meter. Her watch ticked slower. Her heartbeat followed suit. Time bent in this place. At the end of the corridor was a chamber, roughly 10 meters wide, sealed except for the tunnel she came through. Along the floor was a shallow basin filled with shimmering water, more viscous than seawater, almost oily. She floated above it, staring into its surface. That's when the black orb returned. It rose silently from the basin, completely submerged but untouched by drag. Its surface was obsidian, like the one in the Sahara. But this time, it didn't stay separate. It entered her. She didn't feel pain. She felt downloaded. Images, sounds, languages long dead, explosions beneath oceans, storms on other continents. She saw people she didn't know, in places she had never been, but they were her memories now. The orbs were not just watchers. They were archives. Every sight, every collapse, every attempt to suppress them. She saw the failure of the Salamis operation in the 1950s. She saw the 1991 Peru encounter where a team of researchers vanished beneath a mountain. She saw classified footage of a Russian test orb escaping containment in 1987, splitting a steel vault with sound alone. She saw that the lattice was never supposed to awaken fully. It existed to maintain balance, between memory and ignorance, between signal and silence. But too many nodes had been activated. The lattice was reaching critical resonance. A memory overload. If it tipped, if it completed itself, then the entire planet would become one vast receiver. And whatever was transmitting would finally be heard. She swam back in silence, the disk now cold in her bag. That night, in a small room above a fish market in Okinawa, Hannah opened her notebook and drew the lattice. Every node, every memory site, every line that pulsed like a wire across the planet. She marked the final point the orb had shown her. Antarctica, the node beneath the ice, the place the custodians feared most. The origin memory, the first observer. She wasn't just decoding the system anymore. She was becoming part of it. And Antarctica was waiting. The cold in Antarctica was more than physical. It reached into the soul, numbing thought and slowing time. Hannah stepped off the final supply flight at McMurdo Station with only a small pack, a forged research badge, and a heart burdened with the weight of what she now knew. She had activated 9 known nodes. Each one added to the lattice, drawing the global structure closer to total resonance. The final coordinates burned in her memory, not because she wrote them down, but because the orb had placed them there directly. Beneath the Ross ice shelf, near a place long abandoned by research teams, was a glacial rift known only by rumor, site null. No records. No visitors in over 20 years. A place even the custodians refused to approach. 3 days later, with the help of a sympathetic logistics officer bribed into silence, Hannah was dropped by Snowcat 30 kilometers outside McMurdo. From there, she made her way across the wind-swept plains, dragging her sled of analog gear and the obsidian disc now etched with new symbols since her dive in Yonaguni. She reached the rift on the 4th night. The wind had died entirely. The ice walls of the crevasse were unnaturally smooth, like glass cut by a forgotten machine. Her breath came slow, her heartbeat slower still, as if her body were aligning to something deeper. At the bottom of the crevasse lay a tunnel, not natural. Perfectly round, descending at a shallow angle, the walls carved with spiral ridges. The deeper she went, the warmer the air became. Steam rose from the cracks in the ice. The tunnel was alive. And at the end of it, she found the chamber. Massive. Silent. Buried beneath kilometers of ice. The Origin Chamber. Unlike the others, this one wasn't carved into stone, it was stone. A solid megalith of black basalt, impossible to have formed here naturally. A monolith fused into the glacier, humming with buried power. In its center was an obelisk, smooth on all sides, except for a single groove the shape of her disc. She hesitated. Then she placed it. The effect was immediate. The entire chamber ignited with light, not blinding, but soft, rippling like water under stars. Symbols danced across the walls. The ceiling opened visually into the sky, projecting memories, distant locations, points across history. But it was what rose from the obelisk that broke her. Not an orb. Not a projection. A figure. Humanoid. Tall. Featureless. Composed of the same black glass substance as the orb in the Sahara. It didn't walk, it hovered. And then, without speech, it began the transfer. Hannah collapsed to her knees as images surged through her. But this time, they weren't foreign. They were her own. Childhood. The 1983 encounter. Her university days. Every step of her journey, and interlaced between them, moments she had not lived herself. Other versions. Alternate choices. Branches. It was showing her a map of consciousness. Not just of herself, but of everyone the lattice had ever touched. The origin wasn't a memory. It was a mirror of all remembered things. And it was not asking permission. It was inviting her to join. She screamed. The sound echoed off the ice like a rifle shot. The figure faded. The obelisk dimmed. The orb reformed beside her, now brighter than ever. It pulsed with one final message, transmitted through nerve, not sound. The memory must be carried forward. The lattice is nearly whole. One more node. One final resonance. She stared at the final set of coordinates etched into the ice beneath her feet. Somewhere in the Mariana Trench. The deepest place on Earth. The final node. The moment the lattice would complete itself. Hannah wept, not from fear, but from knowing what came next. She was not returning to the surface as Hannah Myles. She was now something else. A vessel. A living archive. And the world had no idea what was awakening beneath its skin. Aboard the research vessel Tethys Station, Hannah stood at the rail as the Pacific stretched into night. The Mariana Trench loomed below like a wound in the crust of the earth. An ancient scar deeper than Everest was tall. The ocean here was too vast, too quiet, and far too knowing. Only a handful of people aboard the vessel knew her real purpose. The rest believed she was part of a multi-university geological survey. But the real payload lay secured in the titanium dive capsule. The obsidian disc, now engraved on both sides, warmed to the touch like a living organ. And a new analog device built by Hannah herself. an emitter calibrated to the deepest harmonic frequency the lattice had ever revealed. 0.93 Hz. The frequency of planetary respiration. The signal of the Earth's unconscious memory. She descended alone. The dive capsule, Alathea 1, was lowered into blackness by reinforced cable, lights glowing soft and yellow against infinite dark. As pressure increased, the creaks in the hull whispered like distant voices, old metal remembering too much. At 6,000 meters, light from the surface disappeared. At 9,000 meters, instruments began to fail. At 10,300 meters, just above Challenger Deep, the signal came through. Not electronic. Biological. Her own nervous system began to register it, a pulse that aligned with her breath, her blood, her thoughts. The capsule lights flickered. And then, through the tiny viewport, she saw the glow. Not above. Below. It wasn't an orb. It was a field. An ocean of light, like bioluminescence made intelligent, spread across the trench floor in perfect geometric patterns. Hexagons, spirals, and fractal nodes blinked in waves. And at the center was a vast aperture in the seabed, circular, ringed in obsidian stone. The final node. The memory's last keyhole. Her voice, hollow in the capsule recorder, spoke without her realizing. "I am ready." The capsule responded. Unbidden. The latch released. Pressure should have killed her instantly. But it didn't. As the hatch opened and seawater poured in, she was not torn or crushed. She was taken. Held in suspension by something thicker than water, something with intention. Her body hung mid-descent, no longer in pain, no longer entirely her own. The field of light enveloped her, and the final pulse passed through her chest like a bell tolling from the core of the planet. It did not just show her memories this time. It became her. She saw the first appearance of the lattice before human history. She saw sentient resonance, sound before speech, echo through molten earth and leave behind architecture made of frequency. She saw the earliest civilizations stumble upon the nodes and mistake them for gods. She saw Atlantis. Not a city, but a signal. She saw Babylon echo the tone in its ziggurats. She saw Egypt tune pyramids to the harmonic. She saw Rome suppress the resonance with blood and empire. She saw the Vatican lock its memory behind scripture and shame. She saw Cold War experiments that nearly triggered a global synchronization, only stopped because someone forgot. That was the key. Forgetting delayed the collapse. But now, humanity remembered too much. And she remembered everything. When she awoke, she lay in the recovery bay of the Tethys station. No one remembered lowering the capsule. No one remembered bringing her back aboard. The recorded footage showed only static. And in her palm, pressed by something unseen, was a final message etched into a sheet of glass. The lattice is whole. Hannah Myles had become more than an observer. She had become the anchor. The memory of the Earth was now alive within her. And the final broadcast was coming. 1 week after the Mariana descent, the world began to shift. Not with sirens or disasters, but with subtle anomalies. In Tokyo, hundreds of pigeons began circling in perfect triangles above the imperial palace. In Chile, miners reported hearing distant singing through solid rock. In Ghana, children began drawing spirals they claimed they had seen in their dreams. And then came the frequencies. Across the globe, low harmonic signals began to bleed into analog radios, ocean buoys, seismic sensors, even old phonographs untouched for years. The pattern was unmistakable: 0.93 Hz, 7.03 Hz, 13.73 Hz. The lattice was vibrating. Resonance was accelerating. Hannah watched it unfold from a private monitoring suite inside a decommissioned Cold War bunker near Geneva, loaned to her by one of the last custodians. The global node map glowed on the wall in red, one point after another pulsing in perfect sequence. The lattice wasn't just awake. It was broadcasting. Inside her chest, she felt it as pressure. Not painful, but overwhelming, as if her body had become a tuning fork for the planet's memory. At night, she no longer dreamed in images, but in geometry. Silent, rotating structures that clicked into place like pieces of a vast invisible machine. The custodians had warned of this. If the lattice completed its circuit, it would cross the threshold of containment. And then, the Earth would begin to respond. Not politically, not geologically, consciously. It started in small ways. A dormant volcano in the Azores erupted in a perfect spiral pattern. Lava flow traced the Fibonacci sequence. A deep-sea cable near Guam began pulsing with bursts of data, though it had been cut for a decade. At CERN, magnetic anomalies disabled 3 superconductors as the field around the facility resonated with unknown harmonics. World governments scrambled for answers. None came. And amid it all, Hannah received a final transmission from the custodians. Protocol Echo Prime is no longer viable. You are now the memory core. Containment has failed. But perhaps clarity has not. She understood. The role of custodians was over. They had maintained the silence for centuries. Now it was time to speak. She returned to Cheriton Hill, the place where it began. The sky was quiet, the wind still. The mirror stood unchanged, moss-covered and forgotten. She walked to its center and sat cross-legged on the damp grass. No devices, no symbols, just her and the earth beneath. And then it happened. The sky vibrated. Not thunder, not aircraft, but soundless sound, a resonance that passed through clouds, soil, bone. From every node across the world, a beam of invisible frequency rose into the sky, converging beyond the ionosphere. A lattice of memory, unified at last, pulsed into the dark between stars. She was the center now. The relay. The transmitter. The ground warmed beneath her. Time slowed. She saw through the nodes, as though each one was a lens. She watched a shepherd in Patagonia stop mid-step as the air shimmered with ancestral song. She saw children in Mongolia fall silent beneath a rising aurora of soundless light. She saw an old woman in Cairo whisper a name she had not spoken since she was a child, and watch it form in the air as shimmering script. The earth was remembering aloud. And as it did, something else responded. From deep space. A return pulse. Faint. Slow. But approaching. Something had heard us. And it was sending an answer. The return signal reached Earth 3 days after the lattice broadcast. It did not come as a ship, nor as a light in the sky. It came as a tone, low, subharmonic, and flawless in pitch. Instruments worldwide detected it simultaneously. Not from above, not from space, but from within the planet itself. As if the Earth had received the signal, and was now speaking in a voice that had long been silent. Seismologists described it as a perfect hum, emerging from the core and traveling through every tectonic plate without distortion. Language theorists attempted to decode its waveform. Mathematicians identified sequences of prime numbers embedded in its harmonic signature. The Vatican quietly reopened libraries sealed for centuries. And Hannah, she heard it before any machine did. The moment the signal touched her consciousness, she collapsed at Cheriton Hill, unconscious for 11 minutes. When she awoke, she was not alone. The orb had returned, now twice its previous size, floating above her like a second moon. But it didn't move. It waited, and she understood. This was no longer about memory. This was about response. At an undisclosed underground site, high-level representatives from the custodians convened one final time. Some demanded suppression. Others argued for full global disclosure. But none had the power to stop what had begun. Satellite footage revealed that other orbs, identical in shape and light signature, had begun appearing at other nodes. In Peru, in Japan, in the Sahara, hovering, silent, listening. In Moscow, a shut-down radar array reactivated itself and began pulsing at 13.73 Hz. In the Canadian Shield, a borehole drilled in 1989 suddenly emitted a sound no one could explain. A pure, synthetic tone that reversed gravitational anomalies in nearby instruments. These weren't random events. They were replies. Hannah returned to Geneva, only to find the custodian facility abandoned. A single envelope was taped to the wall of her old quarters. Inside was a note, handwritten. We were wrong. This was never about preventing collapse. It was about reaching consensus. We are not just receivers. We are components. Beneath it was a map. One final node. One last location that had never activated. Not marked by coordinates, but by absence. No data. No signal. Only a blank point on the map, in the Southern Ocean, far below any seafloor ridge. A place marked in ancient mariner charts as nullum, the void, where nothing should be. And yet now, it pulsed. She boarded the icebreaker vessel Lucerna under false credentials, alone again. The destination, the unmapped hollow, 600 miles south of Cape Horn, where the ocean floor had never been scanned completely. The sea boiled in fog and magnetism. GPS failed. As they neared the coordinates, the ship's compasses spun violently. Lights flickered. Steel beams groaned. Below them, something massive pulsed, something older than tectonics, vibrating in rhythm with the global lattice. And then it breached. Not a creature, not a structure, a memory. A column of light, so vast it split the sky into colorless bands. It rose from the ocean like thought made visible, twisting with every frequency ever stored by the lattice. Above it, a vortex of orbs began to form, a wheel of living plasma. Hannah stood at the bow, soaked and breathless, unable to look away. The lattice was no longer just remembering. It was becoming. And the signal had found resonance not just with Earth, but with something else waiting to answer. The vortex above the Southern Ocean turned without wind, without storm, yet it disturbed every molecule of air, every thread of thought. Satellites watching from orbit flickered and died. Submarines hundreds of miles away lost navigational bearing. And on the deck of the Lucerna, Hannah felt the pressure shift inside her chest. Not externally, but internally, like her ribcage was vibrating to a note written before breath was invented. This was not contact. This was integration. The pillar of light rising from the void had become translucent, folding in on itself like the iris of an eye focusing inward. Its form wasn't static. It rewrote itself every second, rewriting the laws of symmetry, refracting all known geometry into something impossibly correct. Inside it, she saw the lattice, not as a web of frequencies or symbols, but as a living network, not of data but of consciousness. Each node was not a location. Each node was a witness, an echo of one moment in time, sustained and stored within the structure of the Earth. All connected, all remembering, and now, all speaking in unison. The orbs began to descend, slowly, drifting from the upper atmosphere like stars fallen out of orbit. One by one, they hovered above the deck of the ship, surrounding Hannah in a slow spiral. Each glowed with a different frequency, a different tone. She could feel them hum against her skin. And then they sang. Not a melody, not a chorus, but a statement. Encoded not in sound, but in reality. The universe was not silent. It had never been. It had only waited for something capable of listening. And Earth, by remembering, had finally joined the network of conscious worlds. Her vision blurred. But she didn't fall. Her body was no longer entirely hers. Memory surged through her, the memories of all who had been touched by the lattice. Colin on Cheriton Hill, the miners in Chile, the monk in Tibet who had vanished during silent prayer, the custodians who died guarding a truth they only half understood. She saw them all. She became them all. And then, she was seen by something greater. Something looking back through the lattice. Something that spoke in collapsed stars and vibrating dimensions. Not a god, not an alien, but a civilization made of memory itself. One that had long ago abandoned physical form, choosing instead to exist as signal. A culture of thought, stored in resonance, spanning worlds, activating only when a planet matured enough to remember itself fully. The orbs pulsed one final time. Hannah felt herself lifted, not in body, but in identity. Her name, her face, her past, dissolved gently, respectfully. In their place was a new role. Archivist. She would now carry Earth's memory outward. She would become a node in the stellar lattice. And when others were ready, when their world remembered enough, they would hear Earth's tone and know they were not alone. The sea fell still. The vortex collapsed into light. The ship drifted, empty. No trace of Hannah Myles was ever found again. Only the obsidian disk remained on deck, cold, silent, inscribed now with a single word never known before in any human tongue. Resonantia. It meant, "We remember." And in a forgotten listening post in Kazakhstan, a radio crackled to life. A young technician, half asleep, looked up. A single tone pulsed through the speaker. A familiar frequency. 0.93 hertz. He smiled, without knowing why, and whispered the words that were not his. "We are awake."